Hi, I'm Bill Bishop, Chief Architect at Brick Meets Click, and I'm here today to talk with two experts about what's happening in the grocery business in this COVID and impacted world. Those folks are Morgan Siebert, who's the Managing Director of Analytics at Nielsen, and Ken Weme, who's the founder and chairman at Engage 3. So let's start really with the question, and maybe we'll start, Morgan, with you. What kind of changes that have you seen consumers make that have been most surprising to you in the last couple of months as they've reacted to COVID and the related change?
Yeah. First of all, Bill, thanks for having us. At Nielsen, we've been watching the consumer very closely through both our point of sale data as well as our household panel information. And I think as the consumer was faced with the COVID pandemic environment starting in early March, we did see a lot of behavior that I think we would have expected or intuitively makes a lot of sense. First and foremost, we saw consumers changing their trip dynamics, where we saw consumers buying 20% more on the average trip than they did in prior years. So we're seeing a lot of that consumer stock up behavior. At the same time, we also saw consumers change where they were shopping. Over 90% of consumers throughout March and April were doing their primary grocery shop within 5 miles of their home. And so we really saw consumers consolidating their trips at their local grocery store. And we also saw a significant amount of out of stocks in store, where we saw out of stock spike about 280% during the initial pandemic buying in late March and early April, as those consumers were really stocking up and putting real pressure from a supply chain on that grocery store close to home that I mentioned before. In terms of what surprised me, I think there was really three areas that we were really surprised about as we looked at the consumer response to COVID. The first of which was the shift in channels. It certainly made a ton of sense to us that consumers were shifting to online as they were looking for the safety and the convenience that online channels afforded them during this time. But we really saw the grocery class of trade winning. We saw the grocery retailers increasing their share of consumers' wallets by nearly 6 points, and almost $5 billion of incremental volume was flowing into that channel from other channels, with volume being sourced from mass retailers and dollar retailers specifically. The second behavior that was really surprising to us was not the behavior itself, but the scale of the behavior. We saw, as I mentioned before, a tremendous amount of pantry loading from the consumer, where they were really buying a lot more on a per trip basis. Certainly some of that led to increased consumption, as there was less opportunity for the consumer to go to restaurants or other away from home consumption opportunities. But we saw about a third of those incremental units are actually items that are now being stored in the consumer's pantry. And so we estimate that there's about $13 billion of incremental inventory sitting in consumers' pantries as they've loaded up and then held a lot of that excess inventory within their pantries that we think could create some down the line headwinds for brands as those consumers have to work through that inventory. And then the last thing that really surprised us was how retailers were responding from a on-shelf availability perspective and an assortment point of view. One of the things that we've seen historically at Nielsen is the smaller, more nimbler brands are historically been the growth drivers for fast-moving consumer goods categories. Those are actually been the brands that have been most hard hit from a shelf space perspective during the COVID period. For those smaller brands, we've seen their shelf space being reduced by about 10%, which is sort of atypical to what we've seen historically, where they've been growing their share of space and really driving overall growth in FMCG categories, as I mentioned before.
Well, that's fascinating. Change on a number of dimensions. Ken, how about you? What have you seen that surprised you?
Well, there's definitely been a push to online, as Morgan was saying. And so we've seen as there's been more consumer shopping online, we're also seeing retailers be more open to using online for competitive pricing data. And what's also helped with that is it's difficult to get people in the stores during this period. So that's been helped push retailers to using more online competitive data as we see that. And then the other thing that we've been seeing is a much more focus on health. As we've seen people with the chronic diseases are ones that are more affected by the COVID. We're seeing a lot more retailers put a real focus on health. Kroger, for example, now has a president of health. CVS recently acquired Aetna. And we're seeing more and more progressive retailers appoint health executives or health officers.
So we're going to probably see some very significant changes in the relatively near future as people make the adjustment that you're suggesting.
Yeah, I believe so.
Coming back maybe to prices, Morgan, I was wondering, I know you've talked a little bit about, and your data shows price increases in a number of categories. Do you have a point of view on what the outlook is for food inflation in the next few months, or maybe 6 to 12?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. As you said, our data has definitely shown a pretty significant increase in prices that consumers are paying at the shelf for products. Over the last 2 months since the pandemic started, we've seen grocery prices rise by about 4 points across the total store on a like-for-like item basis. And that was really driven by a 30% reduction in promoted volume that we saw in the average grocery store. And when we went out and talked to our retail partners, they told us that they were really just focused on getting the product on the shelf, making sure they had the proper stock of the item that consumers were looking for, and they cut back on their promotions to ensure that they could meet the demand that their consumers have. In those same conversations with our retail partners, they told us that they did want to get to a new normal, if you will, around their promotional cadence as soon as possible. Historically, promotions have been a great way to drive traffic into the store, and they see an opportunity to really win a disproportionate share of volume as they return to a normal cadence with their promotional calendars. What we are seeing in our data, though, as we've been tracking it over the last few weeks, is that return to normal or return to historical levels from a promotional perspective has been very, very slow. And given the pace or lack thereof, if you will, of that return to normal on promoted volume, we're still seeing prices being elevated about 2 to 3 points in the average grocery store versus historical levels. And so I think as we head into the back half of the year, we're going to see elevated grocery prices. I don't think we're going to see inflation rates return back to normal. And I think a lot of what's going to be driving that is retailers are potentially going to use this as an opportunity to look at the promotions they've run historically and potentially prune out some of those inefficient or ineffective promotions that they've run and really use COVID as an opportunity to clean house, if you will, from a promotional perspective. And then I do think they're going to be faced with higher supply chain costs in the back half, specifically in areas like meat and other areas of the store where I think the supply chain is still struggling to keep up with demand. So I absolutely expect a higher price over the next 3, 6, and potentially even longer months. And if we sort of carry that out from a consumer perspective, that has the potential to drive about $300 to $400 additional dollars of cost for the average consumer as they face those higher prices in the back half of the year.
Well, for millions of households, that's going to represent a tremendous challenge because they don't have the dollars they used to have. Ken, I think Morgan is alluding now to the fact that we're going to have inflation, maybe not the same inflation that we had years ago, but what's your experience in terms of how retailers have to respond in periods of rapid inflation? How does their ability to price and promote change?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. I think they don't want to repeat the mistake that they made in the 70s. And that was not being proactive in their messaging about why they're increasing prices. In the 70s, the retailers were passing along the cost increases, but they got the government and the newspapers blame the retailers and manufacturers for all the price increases. And that's when they implemented the price freezes of the 70s, which was very painful because you weren't able to raise your price, but your commodity costs were going up. So I would say, given that experience, it's really important to get in front and help people understand that the costs are increasing and they're just keeping up with the costs.
Okay, so it sounds like we really need to be as transparent as we can, open the book, explain exactly why we're doing what we're doing, and set a positive mood in terms of this really being a necessary and positive activity from the consumer point of view. Am I reading you properly, Ken?
Exactly. Transparency is the best defense from getting scapegoated.
So Morgan, this growing share of groceries, you gave us a pretty good picture of what the landscape is, but with a growing shift of grocery spending online, do you expect that sort of absolute share of spending to hold, or sometime in the future, whenever it may be, are we going to see a lot of it revert back to the stores? What's your expectation on that?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. We've seen about 2 extra points of share of wallet move online from traditional brick and mortar retailers. And when we go out and speak to consumers, they tell us that about 40% of those consumers expect to continue to buy online post-COVID. And so I think this is a real inflection point for online e-commerce based purchasing in CPG. I think most consumers, from what they tell us from their survey results, have had very positive experiences with their online purchasing. Their traditional fears around, do I get good produce, do I get the items that I want to get, have really been addressed by the great experiences that they've had online. And so we definitely believe that there's going to be a significant and sustained shift to online as a result of the impetus of COVID and driving those consumers online in the first place.
So inflection point from your point of view means we're going to see continued strong growth and shifting in the direction of online.
Absolutely.
Ken, what impact do you see that having from the standpoint of pricing? As more groceries are bought online, how does it change the pricing dynamic?
Well, one is we're seeing that retailers try to align their in-store online pricing, which now means that online pricing is starting to become more localized. But there also gives them the ability to be more dynamic on their pricing, especially with their assortment that's not that's unique from their in-store assortment.
Okay. And do you have a point of view in terms of how product price and fee and service price blend into the process? And does that amalgam of pricing for services provided as well as products purchased result in anything different from the standpoint of pricing dynamics moving forward?
Yeah, I really believe in the statement, you can't control what you can't measure. So what we've been helping the retailers measure is their price image so that they can control their price image. But I believe another measure that's going to be important is retailers move into health, is a health image. What's the health image of your assortment?
So Ken, maybe just sort of as we wrap up this part of the discussion on COVID, what are the big implications from your point of view of this COVID event for retail pricing moving forward?
I think there's two major trends to be aware of. The first is a shift to a health focus, and the retailers that are going to win are the ones that are going to develop loyalty because they're helping consumers achieve their health objectives. Second, there's going to be a lot of inflation come ripping through the system. And so I think retailers need to be prepared for that. And that means that they're going to need to be faster in their pricing and they're going to have to be more precise. Because it's not, consumers will be more price sensitive while you're needing them to take more and faster price increases.
So this game is really going to speed up.
Yes.
Morgan, a little while ago you mentioned talking to some retailers and hearing about how they were aspiring to make some changes over time to maybe align their pricing and promotions more closely with the way they saw their customers buying. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, just so we get an idea of what some of the best and the brightest might be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. I think it goes without saying that we're headed into a recessionary period. And what that's going to mean is shoppers are going to have less dollars available in their pockets. And as we've gone out and spoken with our retail partners, one of the things is very clear is they're trying to prepare now for what's coming 3, 6, 9, or even 12 months from now. And they tell us this is actually a very interesting opportunity time for them because it's really an opportunity for them to clean house in certain areas that they've known have been historical issues for them, but they haven't been able to sort of cycle out of historically. So for example, if I ran a bad promotion last year, a lot of retailers have felt compelled to run that promotion again this year or a similar promotion to cycle that volume from prior years. Given the huge shot of volume that they've been able to have, they really view this as an opportunity to hit the reset button in certain areas. One of the things we know they're really going to focus on is our data tells us that about 72% of promotions fail to break even in the average grocery store. And so I think retailers are going to have a very hard look at which promotions they're running and do they need to run all of those promotions going forward to maximize both their price image, as Ken talked about, but also to maximize their financial ROI. The other thing that I think we're going to face and retailers share with us is there's going to be inflation. We talked about that before. As those additional cost increases are coming through from their manufacturer partners, how do they pass that cost on to the consumer? Do they do it in the right way? And I think a lot of retailers are going to be re-looking at their KVIs, their known value items, their key value items, the items that drive price image, as Ken talked about, to make sure that they have the absolute right price, the sharpest price on the items that matter most, and they're passing through some of those price increases in the most thoughtful way that's going to allow them to continue to drive their price image, but to also hit some of the financial targets they have on their business. And then the last big opportunity that I think Ken talked about as well is really in the area of assortment. Certainly, as Ken mentioned, there's a lot of tailwinds behind health and wellness and the importance of those items to the consumer. But I think as we head into a recessionary period, and as I said before, those consumers are going to have fewer dollars in their pockets during that recessionary period. A lot of retailers have talked to us about making sure they have the right opening price point in each category. So they have not only the health and wellness items, they have not only the core, big brand, highly loyal items, but they have an opening price point that's going to allow consumers to get the products that they want, but at prices they can afford if they're going to have less dollars in their pockets.
Well, you paint a picture of change on a number of different dimensions, which is very exciting and, to your point, overdue in terms of timing. That really brings me to the subject of tools. And just going back a little bit, Ken, gosh, it's maybe a decade ago that you created price optimization here in the supermarket space. So that's a tool that's been around for a while. How's that working in today's environment? And we're going to talk about additional tools. So I'd like to just go back to one that's been around for a long time, and of course, one you created. How's it doing? Does it still do the job, or is it as it runs?
That's a good question, Bill. So that's the platform that we've been developing and evolving over a 25-year period now. It's machine learning, and machine learning is built for these kind of environments where everything changes. It's called machine learning because the machines adapt and learn to changes in the environment. And then at a higher level, being able to control your price image in an environment where there's a lot of volatility in the cost right now. It's very helpful to know where to put your prices so that you're managing your price image and you're not increasing it or decreasing it.
So I can feel a lot of utility for the management of the price image itself, and I'd like to come back to that. But in the spirit of tools, I'd like to pop over and ask, Morgan, Nielsen just announced a new service, Retail Pricing Analytics. Can you tell us about that tool and the main benefits that it gives to retailers?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bill. We're incredibly excited about that. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we've made a significant investment in helping our retail partners optimize their price and promotion strategies. We know that it's often one of the largest costs of doing business for our retail partners, and we realized we were sitting on a gold mine of information that would allow us to help retailers make sure they were getting the right items on the shelf at the right price points with the right promotions to support those items. In short, what our tool does is it leverages our retail point of sale information combined with great partners like Engage3 to help retailers understand how they're priced relative to the marketplace. And this leverages a series of machine learning algorithms to identify how they should respond to the competitive and pricing environment, make sure they get the right price that's going to drive a great price image relative to competition, but also allow them to hit their financial objectives. We've seen great response from the marketplace. We've got over 60 customers live on our solution today, and many of our customers are seeing 5 to 10% increase in bottom line gross profit dollars as a result of leveraging our solution to optimize their price and promotion strategies.
I tell you, those are impressive numbers. It must be a very cool tool. Speaking now about tools, Ken, more recently you've been working on, I know, price image management. Could you just give us an overview of what that is? We can dig in a little deeper as we go, but big picture of price image management.
Yeah, price image management is a solution to help retailers manage their price image and their pricing strategically. So it's an enterprise pricing solution that supports what we call hierarchical optimization. Means we look at how they manage their business. Wherever there's a P&L would be a node in the hierarchy, where we where you can have a strategy for what's your price image versus profit trade-off. How much short-term profit will you sacrifice for a better price image? And so it supports a total data-driven decision-making. It would say, here's where I want to be at the enterprise level, and then all the way down the hierarchy, the optimization tells you where you should be. That's data-driven. And where the art and the science come together is when you override it because you have a certain strategy. So, for example, one of our customers, they had a private label strategy that they wanted to invest in. So they created a strategy around their private label products, and then they could manage that strategy independently, which means they get an efficient frontier curve for the private label, and they can invest heavier in the private label to drive their long-term strategy where they want to be positioned.
Ken, that's very cool. Morgan, I understand in your work with Engage 3, you're able to help extend price image to the market beyond the named competitors. I'm having trouble imagining how that works. Tell me more about it. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for the question. We're incredibly excited about our partnership with Engage 3. As you think about the retail competitive intelligence space, many retailers have historically relied on audit data, often in-store audit information to collect competitive price intelligence data. As a result of that, it was very expensive for them to do. They'd have to actually send a human being into these stores. These human beings would walk the shelves and they'd capture all of these prices. They then collect that information and turn it back to the retailer. As a result of that cost, they were typically only able to look at one or two competitors across a handful of items in a handful of stores and provided a very incomplete view of the competitive set. Through our partnership with Engage 3, we're able to leverage the Nielsen point of sale data, where we get point of sale data for almost 100,000 stores within the US to provide a total market view of an item's price, not just for one or two retailers, not just for a handful of items, not just for a couple locations, but all items, all retailers, and all locations for those retailers. And so what we're able to do is we're able to partner with Engage 3, leverage their advanced price image algorithm combined with our total market data to be able to provide a retailer an understanding of how their price and their price image compares relative to one or two key named competitive retailers, but also relative to the total market as well. And so it gives the first holistic view of competitive price intelligence and price image that's available to retailers today.
Having done a fair amount of this kind of work in the past, what you just described is a revolutionary breakthrough. To be able to move from the constraints of working with just named competitors, and you never know who's on your left or right. So what a marvelous breakthrough. Ken, we've talked now a little bit more about the price image management. Could you give us an example? I know you started to do that a little bit with private label, but could you give us a little bit sort of soup to nuts, beginning to end example of how a retailer might use price image management, focusing directly on the trade-off of margin and price image that you described?
Yeah. So organizationally, it's usually going to be just a couple people, probably the CMO, maybe a couple of their key reports, because they're setting the strategy. So this might be a process that would be done maybe once every three months, once a year. And they're going over the strategy for each category, for each unique strategy they have, like a KBI strategy or private label strategy. And they're setting basically how much they're willing to invest to have a better image on those areas. And then once those targets are set, then that's the price optimization is managed by hitting those targets. And so it's just managing it as it goes through until they reevaluate the strategy again.
Gotcha. So is it fair to say that once they're implementing price image management, it's almost on autopilot against very specific objectives, and you keep bringing the prices back, shall we say, on course to stay in that direction?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So what it would do is going through this period where all of a sudden there's a lot of cost change, there's a lot of volatility in the cost. It's just going to be helping you manage where to put your price to manage that price image and maintain that strategy set.
Morgan, one of the things I understand now is that you're able to give retailers feedback on the impact of a price change in almost real time. Incredible capability. That's probably the half a dozen now incredible new capability we've discussed on today's program. But tell us a little bit about what you recommend individuals to do with that. I mean, it's an overpowering capability. Well, what should they do with that to get the best value?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, one of the things retailers had historically struggled with is they'd make all of these changes and then they wouldn't have great insight or great context into what those changes did for their business. And for those that did, they'd only be able to see what that did in the context of what happened in their four walls. Through the partnership that we have with Engage3, we're able to bring a total market view to how these different price changes are actually impacting volume, financials, and share of market, so we can get a nice benchmark relative to other competitors, how volume is moving as a result of those price changes. And so what we really recommend that retailers do with that information is they should be constantly monitoring the price changes that these systems are creating to make sure they're driving the right blend of KPIs that they're looking for, making sure they're hitting their price image objectives, their financial objectives, and their top line objectives is the true win-win for a retailer from a price change perspective, and leveraging these machine learning capabilities that Nielsen and Engage3 bring to the table really allows retailers to quickly see how their changes are impacting those three KPIs and make course corrects in live time so they can continually refine their pricing strategy, respond to competitive activity, and make sure they're putting the best price forward for their consumers.
Providing that kind of feedback is very worthwhile. In the early days of computer-driven replenishment, one of the big issues was retailers were reluctant to delegate important decisions to a machine because they really didn't have an ability to cross-check or validate until holes appeared or inventories went out of whack. But with the feedback system you're providing in your combined service, that happens on a very regular basis, as both you and Ken have explained. And I would imagine that makes it a lot easier for retailers who may not necessarily be able to follow the algorithms to be comfortable with the recommendations. So we've talked about quite a few different subjects here. And looking back at the developments that have occurred and the things you have all experienced, is there anything we've been through in the last 6 months that kind of gives a suggestion in terms of where the business is headed? Ken, first to you and then to Morgan on this. What have you seen or learned that informs your intuition as to what's going to be facing us in the future?
Over the next 6 months, I think we're going to continue to have challenges in the food supply chain. Is still a lot of the meat processors are still not up and running. I think we're going to see inflation start to come through the system. At the same time, we're going to see people be really more budget conscious. So it's going to be a challenging environment for retail.
Consumers being more budget conscious?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, as the prices go up and their budgets are fixed.
Morgan, how about you? What's your gut tell you about what lies ahead?
Yeah, I think a lot of that's really going to depend on the trajectory of the virus, Bill. But one of the things that I think we've seen tying to some of the tools that we've talked about today is a huge demand from our retail partners for the types of solutions that we've talked about and the solutions that we provide in partnership with Engage3 today. And so I think retailers are really going to want to get on top of their pricing dollars now more than ever. One of our recent joint clients that we have with Engage3 actually reduced their investment in competitive intelligence data, but increased the amount of insights and the amount of data that they were collecting by over 1,000%. And so I think you're going to see retailers really navigate to more of these machine-driven capabilities, leveraging price image, web scraping to collect competitive data, our information combined with Engage3's data to provide a more holistic view of price. And so I think we're really going to see a step change in adoption of price image, price optimization going forward as retailers have to respond to changing consumer demands and certainly a more value-focused consumer going forward due to the potential recessionary period that we're headed into.
So this is truly going to be a much more data-driven business than it has been in the past.
That's right.
And I think we can take that really from, a source of authority, you being in charge of analytics at Nielsen, and of course, Ken doing all the great work that he's done. Just as a sort of way to end here, price image management that you're both working on is a powerful tool. What should a retailer who wants to learn more about that do?
Yeah, Bill, just on that question, one of the things we're really excited about in partnership with Engage3 is our ability to leverage our point of sale data and their algorithms to highlight how a retailer is doing from a price image perspective as an example of the capability to really highlight some of their opportunities so we can truly show them how we can help them going forward. So we really encourage retailers to reach out to either Engage3 or Nielsen, and we can share some snippets of how you're performing from a price image perspective to drive some ongoing dialogue and discussion.
We're going to have to ask you this question. As you sort of oversaw the tremendous aggregation of data that you've built up at Nielsen, in the beginning, had you anticipated that it would eventually be of a mass to allow the value creation that you all are talking about today? Was that in the early plans?
Yeah, our founder, Arthur Nielsen, founded this company almost 100 years ago. He wanted to provide a total market measurement view of all consumer purchases across all classes of trade, and we still aspire to that today to make sure we can provide the most complete and holistic view of the evolving consumer for our clients.
What's impressive is that between the two of you, you're doing it. Thank you very much for talking with us today.